The other day, TV channels showed a newborn wrapped in gunny bags recovered from a garbage dump in Delhi. Her timely rescue saved her from the fate that abandoned babies usually meet. That is, they either get devoured by stray dogs or all sorts of insects and pests start eating them alive or infest their bodies. On the same day, I came across an article by Swarna Rajagopalan in the Indian Express that detailed how the pandemic has locked in the victims of domestic, or rather the potential victims of domestic violence, inside the homes with their potential abusers, or they might even be regular abusers, resulting in, and this pandemic offshoot, it resulted in sudden rise in domestic violence across the world, not just in any particular country but across the world. Protection of children has become increasingly essential with increase in their vulnerability to a wide range of crimes, including exploitation and violence. Globally, it is estimated that up to 1 billion children aged between 2 and 17 years experience maltreatment every year. This involves physical, psychological, and emotional abuse of children by persons in authority, whether they are older members in a family, bullies in schools, priests in various religious places, and caregivers in orphanages. These caregivers might be wardens or other staff in an orphanage. Parents and teachers often resort to emotional violence, including restricting a child's movements, denigrating them, ridiculing them, threatening them, or resorting to discrimination, rejection, and other non physical forms of hostile treatment. This often parents say that they are doing it for the good of the child, but wittingly or unwittingly, they harm the child in the long run. A thriving trade exists in child trafficking and pedophilia to cater to the affluent in different countries. This is one of the dark sides of the tourism trade or the tourism industry. The US Sun, it's a newspaper which investigated slimy goings on in the Caribbean island of Sosua, where children are sold to Western tourists for sex. These are not exceptions, mind you. This is not happening just in Sosua or any particular country. It's just because I came across this investigation, I'm referring to it. There are other, including India and Sri Lanka, and even in the West. This trade is thriving. Actually, that is only a mere tip of a stinking iceberg in the ocean of slime that underscores children's vulnerability to exploitation and abuse in the world. Any world. This world is very, very cruel to children. Things are no different in India. According to data released by the National Crime Record Bureau, more than 100 children are sexually abused every day in India. 100 children per day, just imagine. An ever increasing number of cases under the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, that is POCSO, is reported annually. Actually, this act was legislated in 2012. It is a comprehensive law to protect children against offenses like sexual assault, sexual harassment, and pornography. It requires setting up of different courts, special prosecutors, and support persons for child victims. Yet, more than 21,000 children are raped every year. A majority of these children are girls. Crimes against children have increased steeply between the years 2008 and 2018. In 2008, 22,500 cases were recorded. The number shot up to 1,29,032 in 2017 and 1,41,764 in 2018. Out of these cases, 44% accounted for kidnapping and abduction alone. Cases of child pornography and sexual harassment in shelter homes, etc., are on the increase now. Then there is, or rather, more reports are coming of this nature, which perhaps were going unnoticed earlier. Then there is the perennial problem of violation of the provision of Child Marriage Act. Child marriage is still quite endemic in different parts of India, like Rajasthan. Rajasthan, it has come quite often in the media also, that children, 4 or 5 year old children, even newborns, they are married off. How do children endure such torment, which impacts the rest of their lives? To add to their misery, there are hardly any structural or institutional protection and rehabilitation facilities available to them. Hardly any. If there are any, they are not in sufficient strength to cater to the growing number of child victims. According to various studies, violence against children can result in all sorts of injury, both physical and mental and even emotional. Severe injuries may be inflicted by a family member at home or bullies outside. Gang fights are another cause for both physical and psychological damage to a child. The child might be either a part of gang in increasing numbers nowadays. Children between age of 14 to 16 to 17, they fancy themselves as gangsters or dons. Impairment of brain and nervous system can be caused by frequent exposure to physical and emotional violence. Violence against children can harm their cognitive development, which can impair their thinking and reasoning abilities. Physical and emotional trauma can harm their respiratory and immune systems. Unhealthy habits and attitudes develop when children are exposed to violence and other adversities. They resort to consumption of tobacco and alcohol and indulge in drug abuse. They often engage in high-risk sexual behavior. They suffer from higher rates of anxiety, depression, and other mental health facilities. Not infrequently, that is quite frequently, they commit suicide. That is the extreme step a child takes because of exposure to such negative impulses in his environment. Then there are unintended pregnancies, which often happen due to forced incestuous sex at home and rapes outside. The victims suffer induced abortions, which leads to gynecological and psychological problems, and they even contract sexually transmitted infections including HIV. A wide range of non-communicable diseases also affect them as they grow older. The victims are unable to cope with their situation and become vulnerable to schizophrenia, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, and other health conditions. They are known to develop unhealthy and violent lifestyles. They become school dropouts and find it difficult to hold on to a job. Being socially maladjusted, they resort to crimes against other children. What happens to them, they pass it on to those who are weaker than them. It becomes a habit. They have become quite insensitive to the nicer feelings. In this manner, they let loose a chain reaction in the society. Such children use violence as the normal language of human interaction. Using foul language and coercion for self gratification becomes routine in their life. The lines between legal and illegal, decent and indecent, socially acceptable and unacceptable become blurred. They just can't differentiate between what is desirable and what is undesirable. They even become murderers. It is well known that violence breeds violence. And according to certain studies, 80% of child victims, those children who have suffered at the hands of others, they themselves resort to murders and other terrible crimes when they grow up. So, naturally, now let us ask ourselves whether this phenomenon, this undesirable phenomenon, is it possible to respond to it and prevent it? First of all, we need to recognize that violence against children is a multifaceted problem. It is not a simple thing. There are so many strands, emotional, sociological, so many, economic, or even political, religious, parental. So there are so many strands that it has got several facets, and it inevitably leads to the release of dangerously negative impulses in the social environment. There is no single source of their oppression. As I said earlier, there are so many factors which affect them, and there are so many types of oppressors at home, at school, at religious places, even in the public places. This is the reason why there is no single or simple way of resolving this problem. The victimization could happen anytime and anywhere at individual, family, community, and societal levels. Their young age, they're so tender and unaware of what sort of world is around them. Then their gender, I'm talking about girl childs. Low income levels, naturally poor become the first victims. Lack of education, physical and mental disabilities, this is another thing. If a child is physically or mentally disabled, it can get exploited anytime, anywhere. Most vulnerable of the lot. Make them easy targets for exploitation and abuse. How is it that the child is not getting protection within the family, which is the first fortress, the primary fortress for a child? Why is it that the child is unable to get the protection from their parents? And there could be several reasons. That is lack of emotional bonding with parents, even bad parenting, broken homes, and domestic violence. All these things, all these negative factors, they push such children into the net of trafficking and flesh trade. We don't have to even, imagine how these things happen. Violence at home, parents don't care, or they don't obey their parents, or parents are fighting among themselves. All these things push a child away from home and into the waiting claws of the antisocial elements, the criminals, the gangs, mafia, all sorts of things. And if they don't fall into the claws of the mafia, there is always local bad elements. They fall into bad company and become prey to drug abuse and other crimes. So if we want to end the menace of violence against children, we need to take these factors which we have just discussed into consideration before formulating a sophisticated, comprehensive, and multi-pronged initiative. These initiatives have to be at different levels. This is where the involvement of political and social organizations, whether they are in power or not. We just don't expect the ruling political party to do everything. Even other political parties are morally bound to share or participate in these initiatives, and it is imperative for them to do it. They should be continuously serving the society. They can do it if they will. Programs relating to health, education, and poverty alleviation should be implemented or taken up on a war footing, and this applies as much to the government as to other political parties. These should be backed up with formulation and implementation of policies on economic and social equity. Now, this is where the government has to take the initiative. Various instruments and institutions of governance should be strengthened and made responsive to the problems facing our children, women, and others from the weaker sections of the society. Women and children are the most vulnerable, along with the physically and mentally handicapped persons. It is understood that such reforms can become effective only if the powers that be win over the confidence and unconditional support of common people. Only when citizens become enthusiastic participants, such daunting problems can be successfully tackled. This is where the role of the media and various NGOs come into play. Media actually influences the public opinion. It helps in creating national consensus on such issues. It can do it if it really honestly devotes itself to such issues, which we all know what today's media does. You hardly have anybody, any channel or TV outlet or even newspapers taking up such issues on a war footing. They don't even, they just at the most, what they do is they make a cursory reference to it, and then they forget all about it. No follow-up is done. At least to my knowledge, hardly any major such issue has been thoroughly pursued, like what they did with Riya Chakravarti and all that. Instead of devoting their energy, instead of wasting their energy on those stupid things, they should be devoting it, channeling it to resolving the real issues and problems facing the citizens of this country. That is why I will end up with this. Are our media and NGOs up to it? Is our political system up to it? Your guess is as good as mine. Thank you very much for being with me. I'll come back with another issue soon. Bye till then.